Let's turn now to our next guest, Ivo Daalder. He is the former U.S. ambassador to NATO and the CEO of the Chicago Council on Global Affairs. Ambassador Daalder, very good to have you on the show, sir.
Good morning.
Good morning. So, as you may have heard me discussing with my colleague, 1,000 days into this invasion, into this war, a war that Russia said wouldn't last 2 weeks before they would have conquered Kyiv. But the story keeps going. And the latest is that Russia has made this proclamation, revised their nuclear doctrine, saying that any country that attacks Russia, which is supported by a nuclear power, is considered a joint attack on Moscow, which, if you take that out to its Russian conclusion, means that the Americans and Europe are now involved in a war with Russia. What is your assessment of this revision?
I don't take it very seriously. It's something they've been talking about for quite a long time. Here's the reality. Russia invaded Ukraine not just 1,000 days ago, almost 12 years ago in early 2014 when it annexed Crimea and directly supported forces inside the Donbass. This war's been going on for a long time, and the reason is very clear. Vladimir Putin wants to dominate, subjugate Ukraine and incorporate much of its territory as part of Russia. That's what this war is about. It's not about the question of who supports whom or whether nuclear weapons can be threatened or not. That is what is at stake here. And the West has stood up and said, no, you can't change borders by the use of force. We won't accept it. We'll put not only major sanctions on it, but we will support the victim of this aggression, which is perfectly allowed to do under international law. And that's where we are, including the fact that the U.S. has now allowed Ukraine to use forces inside Russia against Russian targets, including these longer-range missiles that your reporter was just referring to.
Is that ability for the Ukrainians to use the long-range missiles at Russian targets coming too little too late, sir? Especially we're in the final days of the Biden administration, and Donald Trump and his Vice President J.D. Vance have repeatedly said there's at least a lack of interest in this war and certainly a desire for it to come to a conclusion and maybe not necessarily on side with Ukraine.
Yeah, it is. It's certainly late. Whether it's too late is to be seen. But it is very, very late. It would have been much better if the United States and its allies had not only supplied these weapons earlier, but allowed them to use against targets that were attacking Ukraine. Just remember what the Russians are shooting at Ukraine. Just over the weekend, they launched 120 missiles on civilian targets. And the response from, if the reporting is correct, would be 6 missiles on a military target. That's what Ukraine has faced. It has faced 25,000 drones and missiles just in the last 1,000 days, being attacking its territory. So yes, more needs to be done. Now, you rightly raised the question, the worry that there is a fatigue in certain countries, and certainly Donald Trump and J.D. Vance, and by the way, the people he has appointed as major national security leaders are no fan of helping Ukraine. That is unfortunate. In fact, it's deeply unfortunate. It's wrong. But the reality is Ukraine is fighting a war. It will do whatever it needs to do in order to ensure that its territory is not subjugated to the Russians. This war won't end just because Donald Trump says it will end, nor will it end just because Donald Trump decides that he no longer wants to support the Ukrainians. It's up to all other countries, the Europeans, including as well the Canadians, to continue to provide Ukraine with whatever capabilities it needs to defend itself. In the end, this is a very simple conflict. One side is the aggressor, the other side is the victim, and we as civilized people should be standing not only with the victim, but supporting it.
Ambassador, I've heard you say in the past that NATO needs to become Eurocentric, that the Europeans need to rely less and less on the Americans, saving them, bailing them out, providing the weapons and the resources that are required. Is there an appetite amongst the European nations of NATO to move forward in that direction?
There's a big debate. I think the reality is that most European governments and people were hoping for a different outcome in the election and are still, to some extent, hoping that Donald Trump won't fulfill the the promises that he has made, which is basically to say to the Europeans, I don't care about what happens in Europe. I don't care about European security. This is for you guys to solve. As that realization penetrates the European political system, as I think it's starting to do in the past few weeks, you will see Europeans becoming more and more interested in figuring out ways in which they can provide for their own defense. It's not because they can't. Let's be clear, the European economy alone is about 10 times that of Russia. There's no reason why Europe as a whole can't deploy the military capabilities and forces sufficient to deter and, if necessary, to defend against the Russian military attack. The willingness to do so, frankly, hasn't been there, in part also because the United States has discouraged Europeans from taking independent action. Now the Europeans are more likely to listen less to Washington and hopefully more focused on the geostrategic threat that it faces in the East.
Ambassador, before I let you go, we are taking a day to reflect a bit on what's happened in Ukraine, in the world in these past 1,000 days. And you've dedicated so much of your life to NATO, to this sense of a European solidarity, of anti-war sentiment. And I wonder, 1,000 years into this crisis that we've all been witnessing, where are you right now? What are you feeling?
Well, it's a very sad day. It's a very sad 1,000 days. It's a very sad 11 years. NATO was founded on the ruins of World War II in the hope that by expressing solidarity and building up military defensive capabilities, war could be deterred. It could be left to others in other places in the world, but not in Europe. And for a very long time, that was an incredible success. It was an incredible success that Canada contributed to, that the United States was critical for, but that success has been eroded. It's been eroded in the horrific images we've seen over the past 1,000 days, from Bucha to Mariupol, where civilians have been slaughtered and executed, and where an entire country has been bombarded without any reason or rhyme, for that matter. And that's a sad state of affairs, because NATO doesn't exist to fight wars. NATO and the Western Alliance exist to prevent wars. We've not been able to prevent this one. It's a major failure on our part. It would be even a more significant failure if we let the Russians succeed.
Ambassador Ivo Daalder, a real pleasure to speak with you, sir. Thank you again.
My pleasure.